Oh, there's one here. You may
The
need
church
to.
sounds very lively today.
Yes.
Yeah.
This article I saw the other day. Americans are especially likely to view fellow citizens as morally bad. A survey of 25 countries said that we are the most likely to view fellow citizens as morally bad. And it has a chart to show you. With us at the top, in terms of somewhat bad, very bad. So when we've talked about strategic planning in the past, I've tried to talk a little bit about the way in which our society is so polarized, the way in which our communities and our churches are polarized, and to really include that in our thinking about how we make a plan for the future. And the vision for our strategic plan has been, who is my neighbor? So kind of be curious, kind of be interested in understanding who our neighbors are, as each other here, but also as in the broader community, that we are called to be there for our neighbors. And that yoga group is a direct result of having this space open. Because how many people remember before COVID what this church looked like? The pews went all the way to the back, so everyone was sitting back here, and I was over there. Now I'm able to be here with you at the altar. And we now have air conditioning and heating units so that this section is getting heat directly without the rest of the building being heated. And these units in the summertime will give us air conditioning for this area without having to air condition the entire space. So that was a part of our vision of opening up this space to think about the benefits and what it could do for us and how it would look. So basically, in thinking about how we get more people to church, how we build a future for the church, we want to think about kind of a common message, a common mission, that we're all working on a certain way of reaching out and messaging people, and kind of really having that kind of an energy and that kind of a clarity. So what I've been suggesting is that we really focus on what Jesus calls us to do, and Jesus calls us to think about our neighbor. And in that famous story, the man says, who is my neighbor? Like, what are you really telling me I have to do? And Jesus comes back with a story that says, who have you been a neighbor to? Meaning, you should be a neighbor to somebody you meet. It's not about picking and choosing your neighbors. So this graph, that 53% of people in a survey said that they have a very dim moral view of other citizens in our country. Now you can see Turkey is the next one after us as a place where people are feeling some animosity towards each other. Brazil, Greece, and at the bottom is Canada. Canada, 7% of the people believe that other people in their country have a moral failing. 7% up above the border, up above New York, versus 53%. So that's saying that it's something very specific to this country that we have the highest level of kind of mutual distrust and disdain. Yeah? Yeah. It has an impact. And this has an impact, I think. And if people are going to church and they're thinking that other people in their church are moral degenerates or people who are morally unsuited to be there, then that wiggles its way into the church. We're not insulated from this society. What is happening in our society is also going to affect us. We need to be very aware of our context. The community that we're in, the society that we're in, the internet society, the media culture, all the things about our context are important for us to think about if we're living in this context, and especially if we're trying to reach out with a message that will impact or that will get through. So a couple of years ago, the United States Surgeon General said there's an epidemic of loneliness. That people are lonelier than before, and that it's becoming a public health matter. Loneliness is something that really impacts people. Your kind of mental health is something that can really have an effect on your health. And if it's a public health problem in the entire society, then we're all feeling that, and we're all dealing with each other from that place. This is a survey that was done in 1934. Who remembers 1934? In 1934, they asked people, where do you spend your time? And 22% of the people said they spend their time with their family, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? To make sense that you spend a quarter of your time with your family. Next comes school, next come friends, next come neighbors, next comes church. 9% of their time is spent with their church. After that is a bar, a college, co-workers. And nobody was spending time online in 1934. So if we look at this today, where do people spend their time with these groups? What happened? Oh, I'm doing the wrong computer. I got two computers up here. You weren't going to catch that for me, huh? 60% of their time is online. Then friends. Then co-workers. Co-workers was down at the bottom. Now it's at the very top. So aside from online, friends are first, then co-workers, then the bar, the restaurant, and then friends, and then school, and then church, and then neighbors. People don't spend time with their neighbors. They don't talk to their neighbors. So this is an upside-down inversion. Now, if you're online, you may be talking to your family, right? I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday who was saying their daughter is out in California, so they're FaceTiming all the time. So being online is a little more complicated than just being online, right? You may be online and dealing with nobody you know. You could do that, but you could also be relating to friends and family. So do we view God as somebody inside this building? G-O-D, inside the walls of the church? Or do we think as the church inside of God? This is Tony Campolo, a Christian minister. Jesus never says to the poor, come find the church. But he says to those of us in the church, go into the world and find the poor, hungry, homeless, and imprisoned. Really thinking about when we say the church has left the building, that might sound paradoxical, that might sound ironic, but it means we understand ourselves, we are the church, not this building. And when we go into the world, we are the church in the world. We are Christ to our neighbor. Jesus calls us to see people as neighbors and to be a neighbor. The least religious states in the United States, the states with the lowest church attendance. Connecticut is number 5. New England has the lowest church attendance and has for a long time. I mean, if you think about, go back to the witch trials, right? Maybe that turned people off of church, that kind of fanaticism or something. For whatever reason, educational level, whatever, the lowest church attendance. And in our immediate area, something like 30% of the people are Jewish. So our context is a secular country and the most secular part of the country, and a fairly non-Christian, with people who are actually belonging to other religions. The Bible again and again calls us to think about being opening, being welcoming. Revelation of all books. Look, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. We need to think of that open door as the way in which we as a church, meaning us as people, are open to our community. And what is it that we have to offer to this world? Looking at this society in a very realistic way, and us as what we have to offer. This is Walter Brueggemann, who just died a couple of years ago, an Old Testament scholar. The prophetic tasks, the prophetic tasks of the church are to tell the truth in a society that lives in illusion, to grieve in a society that practices denial of death, and express hope in a society that lives in despair. Truth, grieving in a real way, the things that we need to grieve, lamenting things that we need to lament, and having hope in a real way. These are kind of what everybody needs right now, what people have always needed, but what they especially need now: hope, reality, realism, truthfulness, trust. These are things that we have a mission to bring to our community. So it's not like we're irrelevant to our society. We may be kind of feeling sidelined by our society. But when we think about what it is that we would have to offer, if we think about offering truthfulness and hopefulness and honesty about things like life and death, we do live in a society that denies death. People just don't want to talk about death. They don't think about it. They don't want to think about it. And our faith calls us to confront death honestly and to understand God's power over death. That's a powerful thing that people could benefit from. Where is the church? Everywhere. So sometimes people think of church as a place that they come to get what they want. And one of the things we need to do is kind of talk about a mission statement, to talk about what it is that we're doing as church. So some people have this consumer model of church, which is the church dispenses religious goods and services. People come to church to be fed, to have their needs met through quality programs, to have professionals teach their children about God. People come to church, and somebody needs to teach my children. I'm not going to do it. Somebody at the church is going to do it. That's a vision of church where you're showing up to get something. Now, none of you really has that. But to think about the way in which, are we passive or are we active? Are we mostly watching and observing, or are we more leading and participating? That's a consumer model church versus a missional church. A body of people sent on mission who gather in community for worship, community encouragement, and teaching from the Word, in addition to what they are self-feeding themselves throughout the week. You can teach your kids. You can read the Bible. You can learn. That should be integral to what the church is. How do we get more worshipers? We talked about this last year. Learn about the gospel. Be articulate in talking about the gospel. That idea of a society that denies truth, a society that denies death, a society that feels hopeless. We can think about how we can be articulate and conversant in what the gospel brings to that. Listen and learn about your neighborhood. A lot of people have a vision of evangelism where you go knocking on people's doors, right? Have you found Jesus? Have you been saved? That's not our theology. That's not how we talk about God. And one of the things that we think of in evangelism is listening. If you're going to be a neighbor to somebody, you need to know something about them, know how they're doing and what their view of the world is and what their beliefs are, and kind of how we can be of service to them. Really to think about that and have some awareness about it. Listening is a kind of evangelism, if you're actively listening and not just sitting there, just passively listening. We need to think about getting more worshipers. We need to think of priorities and strategies. Who are we trying to draw into this church? What are the messages that we would need? Are we using technology? What kind of technology? Different technologies would reach different people. Different messages would reach different people. To really put some thought into not just saying we want everybody to come, because this is not a church for everybody, to think about who it is that would feel at home here, who it is who would benefit, who it is who would kind of resonate with what we're talking about and what we're doing. We want to have a mission where we're all working at a common purpose, and where that's thinking about how that's aligning with people who would want to join us around that mission. So these three things I think are key. To have a message about who Christ is. To really be able to think about how can you speak about who Christ is. And not just, he was born in Bethlehem, he died on the cross. Who Christ is for us today. A lot of this brings me back to Dietrich Bonhoeffer and what he talked about how grace is not just a free ride. Grace is about having duty and responsibility, about learning and about acting. We need to have a clear, compelling message about who Christ is to us, who Christ is in this time and place. We need to provide authentic community and connection. People are lonely. People are isolated. Now, if someone shows up here to church, it's an opportunity for them to connect, but I've been to churches, not this church, but I've been to churches when I was growing up in church. People walked into that building and walked out and didn't talk to anybody. Growing up Catholic, we didn't have coffee hour or anything like that. My parents knew people, so they would connect to the people they knew, but there was no way in which that was facilitated. No kind of gathering around coffee or gathering to have a discussion. We need to give people a way to understand how we connect to each other. So I see some of you are very good at walking up to people who are kind of being quiet or being kind of sitting by themselves. That's very important. To remember somebody's name. That's a way of making a connection, making people feel like they are experiencing a connection. In a world that's lonely and isolated, we can be the opposite of that. We can be connection and community. It's not going to happen without us thinking about that. It's not going to happen without us intentionally trying to do that. We have to think about how do we provide opportunities, a setting that will help people feel connected. And to be Christ for our neighbor, who we also see our neighbor as Christ. We see the image of God in everyone we meet. So we should treat every person with dignity, whatever their religion, whatever their background. We should treat every person with dignity, to see them as Christ, to see God in them, and also to think about ways in which we can be God to the world. The Bible over and over again tells us about how people lived in the world, how people were sent by God. Think of Moses. Moses was the one to go to Pharaoh. God could have, just spoken to Pharaoh. God could have just crushed Pharaoh. But God said, I want you to go and tell Pharaoh what he needs to do. God uses us as messengers. God uses us as agents of help and healing and hopefulness and neighborliness and community and connection. We have to see ourselves as being who Christ is. So we need to have a clear message about who Christ is, and then we need to realize that we are that Christ in the world. This is a recipe for growth. This is a recipe for bringing people in to offer something to people. We live, as I say, in a very secular area of a very secular country. If you think about the younger generation is less inclined to go to church, less inclined to join a bowling league or to be a part of any kind of group. The younger generation appreciates secularism and pluralism. The younger generation wants marriage equality. The younger generation wants reproductive rights. The younger generation distrusts the establishment, and we kind of represent the establishment in some ways. That may be truthful, it may not be truthful, depending on how we understand ourselves. The younger generation wants independence. They don't want to be bogged down with commitments. They don't want to be making a monthly pledge. They don't want to be dependent or integrated. They want to be independent and on their own. They want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to sit for an hour. They want to get up and do something. Lori and Dave helping us with painting. Patty, when she gets us, making little seeds on little pots and stuff like that. Young people, and when we started going to the Carver Center, some of our oldest members were showing up at the Carver Center. I thought that was for teenagers. People want to get their hands dirty. They want to actually do something. Every week, we have members from this church, some of who are here, who go to Portchester to meet with people from the synagogue, people from the community, to make bags to deliver to children in our community who are hungry. People want to actively do something, not to just sit for an hour just listening and receiving. They want to actually be doing something. We need to understand how the younger generation wants connection, wants to be active, wants to be rolling up their sleeves and doing something. So we live in a very polarized society. This graph kind of shows how Democrats and Republicans used to overlap in the things that they agreed upon, in the things that they were voting on, and how it's just there's a bigger and bigger chasm that Republicans and Democrats used to have a lot in common, not all of them, but enough of them, and increasingly Democrats and Republicans are just separating from each other, that they can't even agree on things, they can't even talk to each other. We live in this society. We need to think about how do we behave as Christ in a society where people feel morally at odds. This is a graph that kind of shows you how people identify as lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, queer. People who are over 70, when they were growing up, 1% of the people that they knew identified as gay, less than 1%. So if you're over 70, you didn't know any gay people probably, anybody who was openly gay. Whereas young people today, and this is not even the most recent, young people today, under 35, over 20% of them themselves identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. So there's a huge gender gap in the way in which people are accepting and including the LGBT community. So for us to think about a younger community, and that younger is getting older all the time, we need to think about how we reach out to them on their values and their identity and their understanding of themselves. So this is a mission statement that we've been using. This is the ELCA mission statement for the entire ELCA across the entire United States. We need to have a St. Paul's mission statement. So this mission statement is very good. It talks about how we are baptized, how we worship, and how we live our lives in Christ. We are claimed in baptism. We are gathered in church on worship, and we are sent in service projects and just the way we are with people in the world. This describes a mission statement for us. We need to really have a more specific St. Paul's mission statement about who we see ourselves as and what we're trying to do. Who would like to respond? Tell me what you think. Thoughts, reactions, questions, comments? Yes. That's a welcome statement. That's a welcome statement. So I can understand why you would think it's a mission statement. It's not really saying what we're going to do. It's kind of saying how we understand ourselves. So really, a welcome statement is supposed to say that we're welcoming us people specifically in a specific way. Our welcome statement kind of identifies ourselves as already representing that diversity. That's another thing about younger people versus older people, about people in certain communities and other communities, is the idea that we want diversity and pluralism versus people who are kind of becoming very questioning about that. So that might be an element of a mission statement. I think that might be rephrased grammatically or something to be a mission statement. Definitely that's part of our identity. So that's something that we as a congregation voted and said we want this to be our vote. So that's us kind of talking together and working out something about ourselves. So it's very aligned with mission statement. I think a mission statement would say a little bit more than that, more than just we're diverse, in terms of how our faith informs that and how our faith is, manifested in other ways.
I think that, like with a lot of younger people, they want to be like kind of respected as individuals. So if we can kind of identify that, respecting you as a person, regardless of what your ideas or goals are, and also focusing on how we try to help people within our community. Because I think a lot of young people look forward to that.
Write that down. Somebody write that down.
Oh.
Remember that, the next meeting. Yeah.
As part of the radical, isn't there something else that we're part of another
Radically inclusive.
radically inclusive? Does that pertain to any of this or different?
I think it's definitely part of it. It's one part of it. So a mission statement, to me, a mission statement should say something about how we see God acting in the world and how we see ourselves as being connected or a part of that. And, you know, how we do it in a specific way. You know, there are churches that open up this kind of a space and they have homeless people on mats, you know, maybe once a week or something.
Yeah.
Now, we wouldn't do that because we have a mission with the child care center, and I don't know that those would align very well. So each congregation has their own specific talents. Now, for us to kind of say we're going to welcome homeless people in here, we would need to think about that. How would we do that? What would we need to set up for that? How would we provide for that? You know, you can't just say, here's the church, go hang out or something. You really need to have some preparation and some skills and some thought about it, a plan about it. It's not that it's not something we don't want to do, but it's not something that we're set up to do, and we haven't worked it out to do that. Other churches do that. You know, different churches have different ways of meeting that. A big part of our mission is music. A big part of our mission is education of all ages. So I think, you know, being diverse is one part of kind of how we live that out, but there's also pieces that are specific. So you're right, we have a mission statement that we're using in place of a mission statement, kind of a default mission statement. And I've tried to kind of make sure people know that, and we should bring it back again to remind people about it. That would be that's a big help. That's a good suggestion, absolutely. So I don't want to keep people too long, so keep giving me your ideas and let me know what else you think. And we want to continue this conversation. So we also did a survey. Art and Lori helped with the Holy Cow survey. You all filled out that questionnaire, so we're going to be having a presentation. We're going to have some continuing conversation about that. So thank you all, and let's continue the discussion.